We've been running these trainings all week long. And so this tonight actually represents our 6th open data training. So that's why the bit.ly down here. So this is a link where you can find this slide deck is bit.ly/ODT for Open Data Training 6 _ ODW. Okay, so the purpose of this class is really to demystify and encourage the use of NYC Open Data. So a little bit about BetaNYC. Yeah, that's the organization that Joseph and I are part of. So it's a civic organization dedicated to improving the lives of New Yorkers through civic engagement, open data, technology, and design. In 2008, we began as just like a meetup, a few friends gathering and talking about these issues. And we've just been growing. And now we actually have over 5,000 members across the globe, actually. So that's pretty cool. We're a rambunctious community in certain ways. So if you would like to connect more with us, those are the ways to do so on the right-hand side. And yeah, there's lots of passionate people involved and just trying to channel these developments for the public. So just a little bit about our visualization about our journey. As I said, we started as a meetup, started hosting community events. In 2010, the city got involved in an open data initiative following President Obama open government executive order in 2009. And then we entered a period, and this is not exclusive to we, this is more to BetaNYC. This is more sort of the New York City community. We began to look at research and legislation around open data, because the president's executive order was just that. It was an executive order, but it wasn't legislation per se. But there'll be more about this in a minute. But BetaNYC became involved in researching how we could turn these sort of policy recommendations into an actual law, which it did a couple of years later. BetaNYC also created this very powerful document called the People's Roadmap to a Digital NYC. So this here that says roadmap, that's what that's referring to. So the People's Roadmap to a Digital NYC. So I remember the very first time I heard about that when I went to a BetaNYC and I heard them talking about this. And it really hit me on some level because I was a history major, still am a history buff. And one of my favorite books of all time from a history perspective is A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. If anyone hasn't read that, I highly recommend it. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. How are these things similar? And they are, in that People's Roadmap to a Digital NYC is about making sure that everyone's voices are included in this path that the city was clearly going down to become so digital, so digitized. And that was back in 2012 or something like that. And it's just under the circumstances that we're in now, it just goes to show how forward-thinking that work really was. So we continue to build on that document, which was a community created document capturing voices from communities all over the city. And then in 2015, we began a fellowship program that Joseph is part of, which has been a real highlight of our work. And we've ramped up our classes and our tools. You're going to hear about BoardStat today. You're part of New York City Open Data Week, which is something that we've been working on for the last few years, making sure that this week of events happens. And partnered with the Department of Education Computer Science for All initiative and helped them bring open data to middle school and high school students. And then one of our last kind of milestones was creating a system for the people of New York to submit us research and data assistance requests. So we like to call these radars, research and data assistance requests, but basically it opens up the possibility for anyone to submit a request for some data analysis from us, because we have a team of students and fellows and staff, and we try to help people out there with their data analysis needs through this system called Radar. So our work is really in these 3 buckets. As we've talked about, we have this Civic Innovation Fellowship. We do research and build tools like in conjunction with one another. Any tool that we build is co-created with the people, with the users, essentially. And we do all kinds of public engagement like this. So this quote came from the People's Roadmap that we talked about earlier. So the fight is for the people to connect and empower themselves. Together, we can make the city safer, more resilient, efficient, and smarter. We want all New Yorkers to be connected to the 21st century's opportunities. Okay. Enough about us. Okay, sorry. New York City history. Okay, so the amazing thing about New York City, one of the amazing things about it and how this all kind of connects is the scale of New York City. So it's a Massive city. Obviously, we've got a budget of $90+ billion, 8.6 million residents, 65 million tourists per year. Hopefully that will continue. And some other facts about it is with 325 government employees, it's actually the fourth largest government in the entire United States. So that would be that the first largest government in the United States is the federal government. The second is the state of California. The third is the state of New York, and the fourth is the city of New York. We really have a massive city and a massive government, dedicated civil servants, and we do a lot. Speaking of our government, its city council is the legislative body. There are 51 city council members dispersed through New York City, each of whom his jurisdiction is a council district. And then there are 59 community boards, and their community districts also overlap with those council districts. So yeah, these are some stats about the city. Another one that I enjoy, it's shocking, but that there's the same number of people live in New York City public housing as live in the whole city of Atlanta. Yeah, we got a lot of work to do, and open data plays a role. So we'll keep going. So this is how the government is broken down. So you can see that the borough presidents basically reside like over community boards. The borough president is a central hub for that borough's community board. So in Manhattan, Gale Brewer sort of sits over 12 Manhattan community boards, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the Bronx also has 12, and Queens and Brooklyn have 16 and 18, and then Staten Island has 3 community boards. Then, of course, there's the mayor, who resides over 50+ agencies, well over 50 agencies, the DA, which is like the judicial, and the city council is the legislative, the lawmaking. So we talked about that open data law. It was introduced in city council, where legislation is first introduced. It was introduced in 2010 by Gale Brewer, who's featured here on the left, when she was chair of the technology committee, actually, in city council. And it took a couple years of massaging and building support for and tweaking and editing. But in 2012, it was passed by Mayor Bloomberg. And it's been amended over time to create a very comprehensive open data law. And New York City was the first city in the country to adopt such a law. So the mayor's office of data analytics was also conceived of during this whole movement. So that's an agency that deals with open data. That's its kind of main mission. And there are more than 3,000 data sets now on open data. Every agency in the city has now an open data coordinator to make sure that the data gets to the right place, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, as far as I understand, it's not that new people were necessarily hired to be this role, but somebody in the office was appointed this role based on whether they were proficient and felt comfortable working with the data. And open data has already had 1.5 million visitors in 2020 alone. I don't know if people have been home more and exploring it more or what, but I think that's pretty typical though. Yeah, there's Gale Brewer holding the Happy Birthday Open Data law. She feels very proud of it, deservedly. And so that's what this is all about. So what the open data law actually says though, which I haven't said yet, is that every government agency needs to post its public data sets on a centralized portal and make it machine readable, has to comply with certain standards of usability and cleanliness, so to speak. It's a strange word, but you guys know what I mean. That it's got to be usable, readable. It has to have certain metadata attached to it. It has to have a data dictionary, etc. So all these things are so that this platform that we'll introduce you to in just a few minutes becomes really usable. And that's where the power of the open data law comes in, and that it's not just a platform with a whole bunch of data sets that are hard to figure out. It's a standardized place to find what information on really whatever you are looking for in a very organized, systematic way. And this has borne fruit. So we'll be looking at the New York City Open Data platform in just a few minutes. Yeah, so open data is important. Why all this about open data? The idea is to make government more transparent, accountable, and poised for improvement. So open data is government data, as we've talked about. It's the government agencies. they need to put their public data on this centralized platform. Before this had all gone on, if someone was interested in how a particular agency was making a decision about something, or wanted to question a report that was created by a particular agency, they might have to go through like a FOIL request, which stands for Freedom of Information Law, to get the data. But the idea is, no, we don't need to bother with making people go through this process of trying all these crazy difficult paths to get the information. Let's just make it available. And in that way, it really does make government more transparent, more accountable, and also ready for improvement when we can pull insights from this information. It helps communities advocate for change with evidence, and the bottom line is that data is at the foundation of much policy. And so if we can have more, if we can make more data available, then good chance we'll be able to fight for better policies. Okay, that's the idea. So speaking of, New York City 311 represents one of the largest data sets on the open data platform. So here we are back to this notion of the people. So New York City 311, we like to refer to as the people's data set because it represents the voices of the people. Anytime you want to, when you're walking around New York City, you can make a 311 service request, whether it's about a pothole that's on your street that's just messing up your whatever car or your bike or your own feet, whether it's that your apartment has been lacking heat and hot water and you want to report that, whether it's a noisy neighbor, whether it's overflowing trash and the Department of Sanitation isn't picking up regularly on your street, for instance. All these problems can be called in and reported to New York City 311. And this generates a massive data set. So at this point, this data set has records of 25 million requests for service from New Yorkers all across the city. So people are really using this system to voice their concerns and their complaints and their problems. And the 311 calls get channeled to different agencies, and the agencies have to deal with it. Of course, they may be understaffed and might not be able to deal with it at the very moment that the issue is happening. But over time, they should be able to deal with the issue. So it really gives power to the people. So with that, BetaNYC created this tool called BoardStat, which helps us break down this 25 million row data set of information. And it makes it particularly digestible for community boards. So for anyone who might not be aware, as we talked about, there's 59 community boards or community districts, and they're like the little governing bodies across the whole city. They each are served by 50 volunteer members, and you have to apply to serve on your community board. It's like a bit of an honor. So if that's interesting to you, you could all check out what your community board is and whether you might want to serve on it. It also has a small office with a district manager and a couple of staff people. So yeah, the community boards are very interesting little governing bodies throughout the whole city that deal with neighborhood issues, immediate neighborhood issues. And if you don't know what your community board or community district is, I would put in a plug for, and maybe Joseph can throw this in the chat, another tool that BetaNYC created called Boundaries Map. BetaNYC. I'm not exactly sure what the URL is, but Joseph will find it. And you just put in your address and you'll be able to find your community board. So if you don't know, I would very much encourage you to do that. Okay, cool. So let me see here what's going on in the chat. Interesting. That I have to be aware of. Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. All right, so BoardStat, yeah, we already talked about this. Okay, and it was built in 2017. So it's like 3 or 4 years old already, and it's gone through a bunch of changes to try to make it better over time. But so you get to BoardStat going to this little short URL here, boardstat.beta.nyc, and it'll give you a short description of what this tool is about, and it'll allow you to pick the borough of interest. So because it's built on 311 data, which as we talked about has 25 million rows, it's so big, that data set is so big that even this like fairly sophisticated dashboard tool couldn't handle all that data. And some of you might like really know what I mean by that if you're a data nerd yourself. So we had to break it up into 5 boroughs. So there's no citywide BoardStat. Okay. Right. So in this case, we're going to pick Manhattan, and we're going to go ahead and look at Manhattan CB12, which is the uppermost community board in the whole city. So it's like Inwood and Washington Heights, right below the Bronx. Oh, so here so once we pick Manhattan, it takes us to this page here where we can pick our community board. So as I just said, we're going to pick Manhattan Community Board 12. in this drop down. And then here on the left, there's all these other ways to all these other views that we're going to be about to explore. So right now on this page, we're just on the first page. But you could, if you knew right away what you're interested in, if like you were interested in like heat and hot water complaints in Manhattan CB12 only, you could take this drop down, pick heat and hot water, and you would be setting the tool in the next pages for filtered to just 12 Community Board 12 Manhattan heat and hot water complaints. But for now, we're going to look at everything. So we're just going to do Manhattan CB12. And we're going to move on to the next page, View by Community Board. So on the next page, this is kind of the overview page. So what it's doing here is it's breaking down all the data into the top 10 complaints. So it's taking all this information and it's starting to make it digestible for us. So in this case, we have someone just entered. Let me just ask Ariane. Junaid, please speak. Yeah, Junaid, speak.
Sorry, I had a question about one of the community members, coordinators that you mentioned. Are there any list of the coordinators for our agency, for example, Department of Social Services or DHS, who's working as coordinator?
That's fascinating. Before COVID, we used to work in the office of the Manhattan Borough President. And so I know who the open data coordinator, but that's a small office, it's only 60 people. In your office, you must have hundreds of people.
It's big. It's after, I think, DOE is the second largest. It's as big, yeah.
So how would you know who this person? There may be a list on open data of the open data coordinators. You could check that out. But otherwise, if there isn't data about that, you could just ask like your chief of staff or something like that. They would know.
But is it available through BetaNYC?
No,
we are working. List of those people who we can contact.
Not through. Oh, it looks like someone found it. Great. So there's open data about the open data coordinators. That's unbelievable. Thanks, Albert. So yeah, why doesn't someone go to that and see if that you can answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the first page of boards breaks down the 311 issues. Right? So these are the things that the people are complaining about in Inwood and Washington Heights in Manhattan. And it breaks them down into the 10 top complaint types. So we see that the top complaint type is noise, street, and sidewalk. But also, please do note that the date range here is just from 2020 until where we are in 2021. So just a couple months in. So it's really just about a year's worth of information. So the top complaint type this past year, this very difficult year that we've all been through, together, the top complaint in Inwood and Washington Heights was noise, street, and sidewalk, which is interesting. I can think about what comes to mind right away is that people were outside a lot because of without any place to go, with stores and restaurants not really being open for so long in 2020. People might have just been out and about to get some breathing air, but not having a place to go inside, which may very well account for this massive number of complaints for noise, street, and sidewalk. It was then followed by residential noise, which you can also draw your own interpretations as to why there might have been a lot of residential noise this past year. It was a hard time. People were potentially more stressed out than usual, stuff like that, and home more often. Heat and hot water. So people lacking heat and hot water. And you can imagine the reasons for that. Landlords not getting enough rent, maybe turning off heat and hot water. So these complaint types often really reflect the cultural kind of situation going on. Yeah. So that's what this does. It breaks this massive amount of information down. And so we see here a map on the right. And then below the map, we have a table of the top addresses. So in this case, we see here that these top 10 addresses or so are each receiving a lot of complaints individually, over 500 in 1 year. So these addresses may be important for a community board to look into and try to understand what's going on at these addresses. Keeping that in mind, we're going to take a look at 525 West 169th Street in the next page, which received over 1,300 complaints. So the next page allows us to look up by address, as you can see here. So we're going to plug in 525 West 169th Street and see the whole history of complaints at this address and all of the specific ones. We can see some of the other issues: noise, street, sidewalk, noise, residential, rodent issues, illegal parking, electric, looks like general construction. And so in this case, on this page, we see that this address has become increasingly problematic over time, that something is potentially happening here that's a little bit of an aberration from its passed, which is all the more reason that a community board, which takes care of the buildings in its jurisdiction, might want to do a little investigating if they have time, which they usually don't because they're very understaffed. But it's that kind of thing. So the next page of this tool is an Explore Map tool. So in this case, we can just start to notice how the complaints cluster spatially across this district of Washington Heights and Inwood, and see, where these things are geographically clustering. So in this case, we are hovering over a large cluster here in the center. I think that's around the George Washington Bridge area. And we have a count of 288 heat and hot water complaints at 711 West 180th Street. That's a lot of complaints about heat and hot water in just one winter. Hopefully everyone is doing okay and is warm enough in their apartment at this point. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that someone could flag and investigate for the safety of the people who live there. In this case, we have selected our complaint type to be that missed garbage collection, because we've heard that that's actually a pretty big issue in this part of Manhattan. And this helps us identify where those clusters are. So here we see that there's another one. There's a big cluster up by Sherman Avenue, another one over in that 180th Street area. And this might enable the community board to talk to DSNY with evidence, right? It goes back to that idea of evidence and say, hey, listen, we know that just since March 2020, just a year ago, we're having a lot of miscollection in these particular areas of our district. And can you please do a better job at those areas? So in that case, that's another example of how it makes government data can make government, like DSNY, accountable to the people. Here is, we're looking at homeless issues. So in this case, we've picked two different homeless types. Homeless street condition, which refers to like when there's a lot of homeless people on a street and it's maybe impacting passersby on sidewalk or something like that. Homeless person assistance, on the other hand, is a different complaint type to use, and you should call 311 if you ever feel that there's a homeless person that really needs assistance. So you can call 311 for either one of those scenarios. And so in this case, we've made a geographic map of these two different issues. And again, we can locate those clusters. And again, we're seeing these same issues coming up in the same areas again. But by zooming into this map, these are screenshots, of course, by zooming in and exploring them, you can generate more insights than what we're getting to now with this just very basic screenshot. So the next page of BoardStat allows us to break the 311 data down by agency. As we talked about, 311 data, every service request gets assigned to the agency that it belongs to, so to speak. Noise commercial and noise street and sidewalk, all that goes to the NYPD. But like an issue like heat and hot water would go to HPD. Issues like construction noise would go to the Department of Environmental Protection. Next is the Department of Parks and Recreation, and maybe issues like dead animals or something like that will go to the Department of Parks and Recreation. When you call 311 to complain about something or to submit a service request, it goes to a different agency. And so what we see here in Manhattan Community Board 12, just since last March, so exactly a year before now, and this has been quite a year, NYPD has received 62,000 311 service requests in CB12 in Manhattan, next followed by Housing Preservation and Development. The other thing that this page does is it shows you the average days to close a ticket. So that gets to that issue that we talked about earlier about making government accountable, like they have to resolve these issues. Now, under some circumstances, they may resolve an issue by saying that they went to the scene and that there really was no issue there. But the agencies are held accountable to try to resolve every single service request that comes in, which is a massive job to do. But that's the intent of this system of 311. Okay, so different agencies are going to have different closing time averages, and you can look at those different averages by selecting one particular agency. One of our fellows a couple of years ago, she was an economics major at Queens College, and she wrote her undergraduate honors thesis on she compared agency response time in different neighborhoods to see if agencies were responding more quickly to service requests in maybe more affluent neighborhoods versus less affluent, or vice versa. Ultimately, she didn't find too much of a strong finding, but it's certainly an interesting kind of question to explore. Okay, and then one of the last pages of BoardStat allows you to compare complaint types to one another. So in this case, again, we're just looking at the year 2020. And we picked a couple of COVID-related issues like social distancing and noise vehicle, which we chose for Manhattan CB12 because we learned from them that there was a lot of like drag racing going on in the streets, especially in the summer, and that it was really it was really reducing the quality of life for lots of residents. So we picked that complaint type. So we've got pink as social distancing, orange as noise vehicle. And now we just like to take a second to ask the audience. I don't know if anyone lives in Manhattan CB12, but this is actually, this was a citywide thing. Can you imagine something that was going on in June 2020 that people might have called 311 about a lot? If you can think back to June 2020.
Oh, I was going to say fireworks for Queens. There were a lot of fireworks.
Okay, so you're both right. Yes, fireworks and protests and riots. This here we'll go to the next page and then you'll see. Was that Ron D who said that about the fireworks?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was many phone calls about illegal fireworks during June 2020. But yeah, Junaid, that's such a good point about the protests and the riots. And in fact, that came up earlier today, and we investigated if there's a specific complaint type in 311 for riots and protests, and there actually wasn't. But someone made the point that those complaint types would probably fall under noise, street, sidewalk, because they're usually outside. Right? So those protests and riots are outside. So we're assuming that all those calls about protests and riots would have potentially gotten lumped into the noise, street, and sidewalk.
Do we have access can we export this data sets like through Excel? I just saw that you have GitHub page. So can we have access to those data sets through permanent API filters, all those 3,000 data sets? Or is it like, I see that you have 80 repositories.
So
you have like 3,000 database, all of them are on GitHub, or is it?
Well, all of them are on the Open Data platform, which is what we're going to show you next. So BoardStat is built on like all that stuff that we just talked about, folks, was just one single data set, 311. But as Junaid is pointing out, there's 3,000 data sets. So it's almost like you could have a tool built on any one of those data sets. But 311 is like a particularly rich data set for the people of New York, because number one, we can use it to address issues that are personal to us, but also because it tells us so much about our community. So that's why we built BoardStat on 311, but there are 3,000 other data sets, and we're going to get to those like right next. And I think that'll answer your question.
I have a quick question. So for a 311 data set, are you able to, I see like the average day, but if you were to go to like different complaints, like filter it by complaints, does it show like an exact time, like for that particular like?
Good question. Great question. There won't be like.
Well, I'm sorry, I meant time of response, not like the time it was made.
Yeah, no, great question. So both is true. You will be able to see the time that it's made, and you will be able to see the time that it was closed. In the data set itself, there is not a calculated field for the time, but you could just look at it and eyeball it yourself. It was created at 3 p.m. and on March 20th, and it was closed at 10 p.m. on April 1st. So we did do that. So there is no like calculated column, but you can eyeball it. You'll see it. I'll show it.
Because I feel like it just like going back to like the response times and how agencies are like motivated to keep the response time short. But like my particular zip code, like precinct, I noticed that like they would close it like within minutes. So I'm just like, I want to see if that's like a trend in my precinct. That way the next community council meeting, I can be like, but I noticed every complaint's been closed in 3 minutes. That can't be right.
Yeah, no, exactly. And apparently people have used this information to really bring up to NYPD that issue. The flip side of it, to try to be a little bit objective about it all, is what did we say? We saw 62,000 complaints to NYPD just this past year. They only have some number of staff people. How are they supposed to address every single one in a timely manner? I'm just trying to be like represent the other side a little bit, but at the same time, there has been a lot of discussion around how they're closing complaints and what their rationale is for when they close a complaint. There's been a lot of controversy around that, actually.
That's good though. I like how you're on both sides, just because it's the numbers are quite large, actually.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. Great questions. All right, so many of you have already pointed out you want to see the data, and you want to see where all these other data sets live. So to that, we're going to go to the platform itself. So as we talked about, this was brought online in 2012 with passage of the Open Data Law. So you go to it by just typing in New York City Open Data into Google, and it'll take you to this homepage here. So one thing we do is we recommend that people sign in and create an account, especially if you're interested in it, which I think everybody in this room is, because why else would you be here? And so you're going to create an account, and this just enables you to like have a place where you can save the stuff that you're working on. If you're working on a little report or you want to do a little data analysis yourself. So anyway, create an account, and then you can also like chat with other people. And then, so to do that, you just click sign in. And if you don't have an account yet, it tells you to sign up. And then it's completely free, obviously. So yeah, and it's useful for saving data sets and being part of the community. And then let's see how we would search system data. So we're just going to type in 311 into this generic search bar right here. And you could type in anything, as they say here, buildings, crime, anything that comes to mind that is interesting to you about city life, you can type in there and you're bound to find some data around it. Dogs, trees, squirrels, there's data around all that stuff, as well as much more serious matters like evictions and demographics and all of that. So in this case, we're just going to type in 311. It is going to take us to the next page. We're just going to list all the results. And in this case, we're getting 51 results, and we're going to pick this top data set, which is the one that has all the data from 2010. And then this is going to take us to their the primer page, which is going to give us a bunch of information about the data set before we actually get into the data. So in other terms, people call this metadata, and it just tells us about the data before we actually get into it. So then next we can click view data, and that's going to actually take us to the data. So here we go. This is what it looks like when you open the New York City Open Data platform. Whatever data set you're looking at, it's going to open in a page that looks like this. So we've got our rows, we've got our columns. In 311, we have 41 columns. And as we talked about, in 311, we've got like 25 million rows. So these are each individual service requests, and these are listed by default. They're listed from most recent to oldest. So at the time that I took this screenshot, must have been July 9th of 2019. I was up that late. 1, 2 o'clock in the morning? I don't know. Maybe someone else took this screenshot. That doesn't sound like me. Okay. So anyway, we see here, that's the latest data. That's how the data is organized. And just by default, we see a lot of NYPD service requests. Here's a Department of Health. But we're gonna keep going. Click this filter thing to start making this more manageable, a smaller data set, because 25 million is really a lot to work with. Oh, but before that, so notice here, these are the complaint types. These are just some of them and so a note on complaint types, there are so many complaint types. There's actually like almost 500 at least complaint types in 311. And then complaint types are broken down into descriptors. So for instance, with the complaint type heat and hot water, you have two different possibilities for descriptors. One is apartment only, or one is entire building. So so there's a lot of different types of complaints in this data. And you as a caller do not need to know what it is. You just describe what it is, and they will help categorize it. So those are some different complaint types. So filtering is to really start making this more understandable to you and more relevant to your own personal circumstances and community. So in this case, we pick filter, and we made it Community Board 12 Manhattan. And immediately from our 25 million, we're now down to 750,000, or a little bit less than that. So at least we have a more manageable data set to work with that we could potentially open up in other spreadsheet software, extract it from here. So filtering is how we start breaking it down. And we also know that all of these requests are for the area that you live in. So it makes it more relevant to you and your personal circumstances. But you can keep filtering it. And keep filtering it. So in this case, say we wanted just like a really small understanding of something, we could look at just a month's worth of calls that were assigned to DSNY, back to that miscollection issue that we talked about earlier, and see a very manageable data set of where the DSNY complaints were. And all these 311 service requests have lat and long associated with them. So you could see these on a map as well. So the filtering is really important because it makes this massive phenomenon way more understandable just by doing a couple of quick filters, and way more like relevant to you as a New Yorker. So we really wanted, there's a lot else that you can learn about this open data platform. It has many other functions, but the one that we really just wanted to teach today is this filter function. There's all kinds of other things you can do. You can do pivot tables, you can make maps and visualizations all within this open data platform, but that's like a little more advanced than what we're doing today. But the other thing to note is that you can export it here with this tab right here, and you could take this data with you so that it's not just on the open data platform anymore. So yeah, that was really nuts and bolts that we wanted to get through today for this intro to open data question training. We wanted to provide a lot of context so that you feel like you have a foundation for starting to explore this stuff. And we're also going to continuously host other kinds of classes that are a bit more advanced for go deeper into this stuff. But yeah, so do you have any questions? I know we're over time.
APIs, do we have APIs available for those? Do we have APIs available so we can connect directly to those data sets and filter them instead of manually downloading them in Excel?
Okay, Albert seems to be quite the technician, and he's saying yes via the export tab in a data set, right?
Is it through GitHub or how is it? How do we access it?
That I do not know.
So if you go within a data set, similar to how you could see like the filtered views, there's things where you can see like export, download, things like that. So via the export tab where you can download, you'll see something for SODA API. SODA stands for Socrata Open Data API, and you should be able to find the API for a data set.
Some of our favorite data that we're working with currently is the eviction data on the open data platform, women and minority-owned business certification, COVID, the New York City tree census, the squirrel census. Those are some of our favorites here, spanning the range of light and fun to pretty serious. So this is where you go. You click topics that interest you. Yeah, hopefully we're going to have time for a little share back, but we'll just keep going. Yeah, if you've enjoyed this training and sort of would be interested in teaching it yourself, BetaNYC is involved in an effort to try to bring these trainings to communities all across the city, and we're always open to having other people join us. So if that's you, make sure you get in touch with us and you could become part of this program. So back to Janae's question. So yes, you can request a data set or ask New York City Open Data a question through this URL here, opendata.cityofnewyork.us/engage. Got it? And this slide deck is available to all of you forever.
Thank you.
So submitting, if we talked about the research and data assistance request, if you have some data analysis that you would like to do, but maybe don't have time, you can send it our way. We make reports, we make maps, and we write letters to agencies about all kinds of issues and more. If you have some data issue that you want to work on but don't have time or know quite where to start, you can submit a request here and send it our way. And yeah, there's also so many people have built so many tools on open data. BoardStat is just one of them. And a wonderful team at Moda makes this project gallery to showcase some of the important tools that have been built on it, like Crash Mapper, which helps us understand the safety of our streets, and Boundaries Map, which is built on something like 15 different sort of shape files that are in open data that help us understand the complexity of our political and administrative boundaries, and also help us know who represents us. And Sidewalk Widths about helping people with mobility issues and social distancing and things like that. There's a couple of other sort of apps and tools that have been made, so you can enter a plate and see about your driving or someone else's. Just Fix is a really important tool that's been built to help tenants get things resolved in their buildings. Yeah. And Sidewalk Widths, we all know about that. I just talked about that real quick. So this class is part of Open Data Week. We're smack in the middle of it. So welcome to getting over Wednesday of the week. And there's lots of other classes and opportunities going on all week long online. So we encourage you to look at some of the others. And this has been a big collaboration by BetaNYC and the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics mostly to put on this virtual Open Data Week. You can read about the latest report there. And we have a page of digital resources. This has been updated since the screenshot. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can get in touch with us in any of these ways. Oh, there's the one pager, bit.ly/resource guide 1 page. Yeah. And I guess that is it. So thank you so much for being here and for staying over a little. Great. Thank you so much for your help, everybody.